beginning of NBE-Therapeutics was really the idea or the concept that the company could make antibody-drug conjugates safer, more efficient, and the whole manufacturing process much better than what was currently out there in the marketplace with the standard chemical conjugation. So based on my experience and knowledge from the field, I was very much impressed that enzymes can do a better job than chemicals in conjugating toxic substances to antibodies in order to generate antibody-drug conjugates. There was very little technical validation that this would work in the context of generating ADCs, and we weren't exactly sure about the efficiency of the process. Well, we developed project plans. What kind of resources do we need? What do we need to outsource? What do we need to do in order to test the system and to test the technology? While we had already formulated it in a patent application with very little or almost no data. The good thing is in patents, when you have an idea, you can file a patent and you have a period of 12 months from the date of filing where you can add experimental data to your idea in order to validate your technology and your concept. And this is exactly what we did. I mean, we filed a patent application with very little validation, very little prototype or proof of concept, and used the early investment and the time to validate that technology so that we could complement or beef up our patent application for a real patent application. And then after 12 months, this grace period where you can add data will end. Then you cannot change your patent application anymore. So here it was the time frame of the patent process that was kind of determining the time that we can use in order to make the best, to get a proof of concept for the technology. And actually in the patent application, there were two different enzymatic approaches described, which was a little bit more complicated from the patent prosecution point of view, because patent examiners want to have, a single invention and not various different inventions in the same patent application. And I can share that one of the two technologies worked like a charm and the other did not work very well. So then it was very clear that we said, well, we established the proof of concept for one technology and we forget about the other one. In a way, there's also an element of luck involved that because that one worked very well, the other one did not work so well. But we took two shots on goal because on paper, both technologies should have worked. It was academically described. And I should also say that for NBE-Therapeutics, we didn't reinvent the wheel. The spokes, the tires, and everything was already there. We just put it together from components that were known in a novel way. Well, you have limited funding available, which means that you can also only do limited things and limited research and development efforts in a startup company, which again brings me back to the focus that you have to have in developing your prototype or coming to a proof of concept for either technology or a drug. So the investors, of course, always want to achieve as quickly as possible a proof of concept or a prototype, if it's a device or some particular technology, of the innovation that you're working on. And that needs very diligent planning in terms of, what kind of resources do I need in terms of people, equipment, other technologies, maybe external contractors who help you in your R&D efforts, because not everything is done internally. Sometimes you depend on external contractors. That requires the best project planning that you can do. And that is something that I think is not so much ingrained in the heads of academic researchers, because by definition, academic research is a little bit more free, goes into the unknown, and very often also does not require planning because you go in so uncharted territory that sometimes planning is even counterproductive to make fundamental research discoveries in an academic research setting. But if you apply this entire academic freedom to a company setting where you have limited resources and limited time to come to a certain prototype, proof of concept, value inflection point, it wouldn't work out. So you have to do, if you want it or not, you have to do a very diligent planning, how much money is needed, how much time, how many people, how many resources in order to come to a particular proof of concept or prototype. And then usually you should double the time and the investment that is needed for that, because you're constantly under pressure to reach this proof of concept, a prototype. And of course, you present this in your operational and your business plan to the investors. And if you don't deliver on this, then of course, well, they might accept it once, but if they don't like to accept it a second time, and certainly not a third time. So to overpromise and to underdeliver is also a bad recipe for success. Do the planning properly with enough buffer in terms of time and money required and resources required to reach these proof of concept and value inflection points, that there's a high likelihood that you will achieve the important proof of concepts and prototypes. Because otherwise you get under pressure, because the investors usually provide you with the money you need for the next big project success or whatever prototype development, on which basis you then raise money at a higher valuation because you have created more value in the company. So if you take too much money on board early on, of course, you would take this money on board on a lower valuation, which is also not in the interest of the founders because they get diluted more, or the employees. So you always have to find that balance. But having said that, being too much at the edge with your planning, there's a 50-50 chance that you make it or you don't make it, or rather only a 20% chance that you make it, I think this is not good. Because the investors don't like to constantly be negatively surprised that you're not delivering on your planning. However, having said that, you're sometimes forced or pushed to kind of promise something to investors that they would like to have, even if you have the feeling this is practically impossible, or it's hardly impossible to do this. So then you come into this 20-80 or 10-90% situation that is very unlikely that you will reach your goals. And I would recommend not to go along this path and rather discuss and negotiate with the investors that this is impossible what they are asking for, that giving your best judgment, you will need these resources, this amount of time, and then it's up to them whether they say, well, this is reasonable for us to invest in this time frame and to provide the money. If you promise them something or overpromise that you can't deliver, this is very dangerous ground. As I said, maybe works once, but will not be accepted a second or a third time. Then it usually has brutal consequences for the founders team. You lose the credibility, you lose the trust. You're setting the company up for failure because you put them under pressure. You are yourself getting into an awkward position. And so it's better to make the best planning possible, add a little bit buffer, and then present that to the investors. Easier said than done. If you speak to investors in the community about your technology, you have to tell a little bit about how this is being done. So if you don't have a patent protection on that, and you speak about it, somebody else can make the patent application and would block you in your development going forward. So therefore, I think in biotech and in drug development or developing technologies for drug development, it's not a good idea to, apply the Coca-Cola concept and have a trade secret on a certain recipe. I think you really need to protect your innovation by patent applications, which gives you then also market exclusivity for 20 years, the patent term or the term of a patent. Sometimes you can extend that patent term even when the whole prosecution takes a long time and you get a patent term extension, so you can extend the 20 years a little bit. Also patent term adjustments, all details. But I think it's a good basis, and investors would like to see that your innovation, well, is protected by intellectual property. And then, of course, the next question that the investors have is, well, are these patent applications, well, can they be granted as granted patents? And then if they can be granted, do you have freedom to operate? So it's not another patent out there that you need to license in order to realize your innovation, because the patent offices never make a check on whether there's another license dependency. They only check whether your innovation is new, inventive, and whether there's a commercial application. Those are the three factors upon which the patent office decides whether they grant a patent or not. But there could be a dependency on another patent that you don't know, so that you need to research yourself. It's very important in biotech companies that you build a solid basis of patents, so a basis of intellectual property that is referred to as an intangible asset for the company, so something that you cannot really grasp, but which has a value because it's a piece of paper. When it's granted, gives you 20 years of market exclusivity. So then this intangible value really has a tangible value because you can sell it or license it to someone who would like to apply your technology or your product. So when they purchase the company or a certain product, the pharma companies want to have it protected with particular patents. Investors usually, as I said, invest, of course, in the project, but primarily in the team. The pharma companies, when it comes to an exit, and now I'm speaking about a trade sale of a company where you sell everything to a pharma company, they are less interested in the team because they have lots of team members themselves who are potentially experts in the field. They have an interest in the asset, in the technology that they can then utilize in their company for their strategy. And very often, I mean, there's a short period of integration that you need in order to maybe get the best, well, not only to purchase the IP and to license the patents, but also transfer additional know-how from the team. But then the team usually gets superfluous and they don't stay with the pharma company because they have their own personnel, their own strategies that simply take the assets, and those are the patents, and develop them further. Yeah, I think it's good to have a catchy name for your product or your technology platform, because then investors, when you go out for fundraising, but also other stakeholders in the industry, have it easier to associate your company with a particular technology. So pretty much every successful company has a little bit of a catchy name for their innovation, so that people say, "Oh, have you heard about this blah 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 technology?" In our case, as I mentioned, I mean, we created a name for our enzymatic conjugation technology, where we use the so-called sortase enzyme, and called it SMAC technology, SMAC, for sortase-mediated antibody conjugation. So it was an acronym that we could support. And we were lucky that this was not trademarked by any pharma company in any other fashion. But you find this with other companies as well, that they come up with fancy names which often involves kind of has positive connotation or connotation of value, diamond technology, gold technology, or platinum, whatever, library. I mean, there are all kinds of fancy names that people come up, or acronyms. And I think this is important because then at conferences in the community, you always use these idioms, these terms. You also try to trademark them, ideally. We're not the only ones. But I think it's quite important not only to have, the innovation, but then a too complex name really doesn't make sense. People have to be able to remember it and to basically, brag at barbecue parties or at gatherings with their colleagues that they know about this technology and can actually express the name. Let's say if you have a particular challenge, a technical solution that you need to find, there's a high likelihood that somebody has already found the solution. It's described in a paper and patent application, and then of course you can't file or claim this innovation for yourself. Somebody else has had the idea already. But I think this is the essence of being very deeply rooted in the science and having years or tens of years, maybe 20 of years of experience in the field and knowing your field technically inside out, essentially knowing what kind of research teams are out there, what they are working on, what kind of solutions they have found. And that, of course, with this knowledge and know-how that you have and the experience, that helps you to very quickly inform yourself about, where is the field in a particular innovation and what kind of solution have they not yet found for a particular application that you're looking for, technology, prototype, drug, or whatever. So the innovation then, when you say, nobody has actually come up with this solution, I've now done my due diligence, and this is never 100%. I mean, you could overlook something, but this will then come out in the patent application process. When you file your patent application, you get a patent examination report, where then the patent examiner himself or herself checks the whole prior art, including papers, patent applications that are published. And well, if you are deeply enrooted in your field, you should actually know everything that's out there. And then you write a patent with an innovation. And usually this is not something, as I said, that comes totally out of the black hole without any information, but it's really, you look at everything that's out there and you see, nobody has thought about this solution for this particular problem. They might have been close, but not yet there. So therefore, inventing things or writing them patent applications for me is almost to find the gap in the field that has not been thought about yet. And that usually has worked. And if you have done a bad job in doing this kind of research, then you get the so-called X documents in the patent examination report, which tells you that that idea that you had was already there by someone else. But having said that, of course, once you file a patent application, you don't do this, or you do some of the writing yourself, but you engage, of course, patent experts and patent counsel, patent legal counsels. They usually advise that the idea that you have is a good one, but you could formulate it much, much broader to get a broader patent protection so that your innovation cannot be circumvented so quickly by a competitor. So you try to broaden it up a little bit. Again, here you have to find a balance in being not too broad, because the patent examiners or the patent offices don't like to give too much away from the forest. They rather would like to give you patent protection on a particular tree, to use that analogy, but not patent the whole forest, because there are other companies out there that can still discover other trees in the forest. So, but of course, the patent legal counsels try to enlarge the scope of a patent claim and make it more general. And that, of course, can then also mean that then all of a sudden it touches on other innovations and patents, and then you have to narrow down your innovation. So it's a little bit, yes, there is a process, if you wish, in terms of making the best research possible in a particular field, knowing what is out there in what is called the prior art. Once you know that, then you know what is the innovation, the novelty in a particular patent that is then likely to get granted. At least in my case, very often I have a lot of sleepless nights where I think about this at night. And then, well, it needs several nights of not sleeping, but thinking about, where is the kind of innovation that has not been done by other competitors or other researchers in the field. And then it's being written down. And then it's presented to a patent lawyer as a first concept, a kind of a invention disclosure, where you say, well, I think here's something that nobody has thought about. This is something we want to achieve. And then you get the feedback. And there it's also important that you work with patent counsels who are experts in your particular field of research. So you need to make sure that you have actually then a product or a prototype that actually can be deployed, that works in reality, and that can be scaled, that can be sold, that can be licensed, or where a larger company sees the potential. If they have this technology, they can scale it, they can make it work, because otherwise it remains a hypothetical invention that cannot be really put to practice. The commercialization, I mean, this is a totally different field. And of course, you try to do as much as you can as a startup company yourself, so that you have a solution patent protected, but also practically implemented, because then the hurdle for large companies is, of course, lower to in-license this, and you can demand a higher price, because you basically say, look, it's not only an idea, but it's something that really works and that can be deployed and can be implemented.